Hello, Ed.
Anant, we're doing this again.
Hey. Oh, awesome. Hopefully, you will not go in and out like you did last time. I heard that you splurged for a $300 camera.
Something
So,
like that.
uh,
Let's see if it works.
yeah. No, you're looking absolutely fantastic. I never do, but you sometimes do, and you really are looking
Uh,
fantastic.
when I get to use
Hey,
my home.
so we've got a doozy of we've got a fantastic show today. Why don't you tell us about what the show is, and then we'll start off with kind of hot news.
Sure. So what we're going to talk about today is really human-computer interaction in the age of agents, and this is a really deep topic, and we've got a great guest who's been working on this for a long time in a variety of ways, but it has a lot of cool stuff that she's been working on related to agentic interaction that we're going to get into the detail of. So we'll be bringing Kate Blair on, who is an expert in this space, has spoken on the topic a lot, and we're really happy to be working with her here at IBM.
Awesome. Okay, it'll absolutely be fantastic. But let's begin with what has been the news in the last 2 weeks since you've been on the show. I've got a couple, but why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure. I think there's been a couple of different pieces. We've seen some of the pieces around Apple Intelligence that have been pretty interesting to see. A lot of that has been a long time coming, but Apple is starting to roll the pieces out, and obviously, I think one of the things that's been a big deal. For a lot of us who's been watching this space is where do we start to see the mainstream applications of this where we're getting a lot of people interacting with this, and obviously Apple is probably is one of the largest, if not the largest provider of these human computer interaction touch points, and so whatever Apple does with intelligence is going to have a lot of impact for how the vast majority, a lot of people interact with this stuff. So that was pretty cool development or progress to see.
Awesome. It has to get first thing it has to get is autocorrect right.
Yes.
Okay. That'll be absolutely awesome. What I saw was that this was the week or 2 weeks in which are we in an AI bubble really, really reach a crescendo level, right? It started with that MIT report, which is 95% of the pilots don't actually go anywhere. And then GPT-5, great, not so great. Uh, NVIDIA, okay, what is really going on, et cetera, et cetera. So I saw a lot of, in some ways, as an industry, we tend to kind of overhype, and then we suddenly kind of go into a frenzy that look, is it really happening or not happening? What's your view on AI hype real or truly AI hype?
Well, I mean, look, we've lived through this many times, so we know uh, the industry can't help itself but sort of run from one extreme to another. Uh, and I think the interesting piece is that we're really in the early stages of the productization and monetization of these pieces. And when we go and talk about the hype, so let's break that down. There's a couple of pieces to it. One was, ChatGPT 5, and, it's gone through really a lot of the same phases that I've seen a lot of the models go through when they get released, which is sort of, there's a lot of fanfare, and then of course there's this massive backlash on socials and so on, and people go and do some benchmarks and come back, and then are like, oh, they spent all this money, and the model didn't meet expectations, and then people come back, a few weeks later, and then they're like, and a couple of things happen, because what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the last mile human perceptual pieces of the model are actually knobs that can be tweaked quite a bit, and so then that happens, and then some people are suddenly like, well, this model's not that bad. And then they start to actually say, wow, this model's really good. Will that happen with ChatGPT 5? I'm not sure, but I've seen some use cases where ChatGPT 5 does genuinely very impressive things that the other models can't. Cannot do. And then you've got the separate pieces of, well, given how much they undoubtedly spent on it, does this mean that we've hit the limits of
Yeah.
compute and
Yeah.
yada yada,
My
right?
golden side
Yes,
overhang. Yeah.
exactly,
60 billion dollar.
exactly.
And
Now, one thing I do want to add is, there's been some interesting analysis and so on. The one of the things that we need to see is, the fully operationalized businesses, both in the core businesses of these, and then the use cases that people are putting them to. Because the reality is that the monetization is still very, very early, and the cost is still amortizing the inference cost and then the original training cost. And when you look at it in that way, you start to get a distorted picture. And I just saw something on Hacker News earlier today where somebody did a first order analysis and people were poking holes on it, but they were pointing out that actually the business of serving these responses, the
yes,
complaints and so on, may not be that bad. It might actually be quite good.
it's at least approximately break even.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I have a couple of slightly different observations. I want to kind of because we are about this meeting reality in enterprise. I want to just address a bit of that. Look, 95% of the projects fail, right? And therefore are we in a bubble? Is there real ROI? And obviously, look, when things are hyped up, if you remember in internet days, look, why don't we have a typical brand site that only sells socks? And then we said, no, that is too general. Why don't you have something that only sells knee-high socks, right? So you'll continue to see lots of people kind of overdoing it, but in the end, internet ended up being highly productive, and even though it went through its kind of standard hype cycle.
Yeah.
So coming back to for example, what the MIT study was, I didn't find it like, oh my god, look, as for our enterprise customers, look, we are going to be soon in the doldrums. I think there's something slightly funny because a lot of these AI initiatives that the report talked about are kind of top-down driven.
So
whereas what you find is, I actually find bottom-up the adoption of AI to be just absolutely astounding, and therefore I'm not able to kind of make the two ends meet, that channel kind of thing. I'm taking from England and I'm taking from France. And you're seeing something on one side, but I actually don't see it. So I think this 95% number is at least 50% higher than what it should be.
Well, I'll give you a
what it is.
Not. I'm glad you brought that one up, because I want to double click on that a little bit, because we actually dug into that study a little bit, and the precise language in it was that only 95%, right, had no P&L impact, right? So first of all, again, let's zoom out and look at the stage of the market and the and essentially what
what happened when you said zoom out.
It literally did. Yeah, that's an AI for you, right? So I won't do that again because it'll throw us off, and I know you in particular don't like it when the autofocus kicks in. But so the interesting part was their measure of success, right? So in it they go in their money quote is that is just 5% of AI pilots were generating millions in value, right? So that's super interesting, because you look at that and you're like, well, look, given the state of where we are, how nascent this is, you're saying that 1 in 20 projects actually delivered millions in value, and that's a massive success. Like, the reality is that look, again, good work done on that study, important, but very early stages, and in fact, if you depending on again, based on its own data, like, a lot of people are generating in that for early stages, right? Let's go back into digital transformation and so on. In the opening moves of a transformative IT S-curve event, that you're actually getting people with having that breakout success. That's pretty cool. That is actually pretty cool. So we got to move past the headlines.
So you're not about glass half full or half empty. You're about glass 95 empty is still 5% full, right? Oh, that's super.
Hey, it puts us ahead of crypto. Come on, look, it's.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Hey, so I want to kind of switch to something else, which will lead us to the topic that we're going to have today, which is that Ed, you have a 5-minute commute, and that's absolutely amazing. So hopefully you suffered through some hills of San Francisco to get to IBM office, but otherwise, I hate you.
It was a self-driving car, by the way. So it was the power of AI.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
I have a 35-minute commute.
Yes.
And my boss didn't hear it, but I don't like to take calls during those 35 minutes. I like to actually listen to podcasts. And so it turned out that I had finished one of my podcasts, and in whatever mechanism that Apple podcast decided that this is the next thing that Anand should listen to, they brought me to an A16Z podcast by Aaron. They were interviewing Aaron Levy, Bobs, and Steven Sinofsky, that you know very well from kind of old Microsoft Windows days. And the question really was about kind of the boundaries between humans and computers and agents. And there was lots of deep discussion out there. We'll get into some of them with Kate. But one thing kind of stuck with me. And it's recent for me. It's not necessarily recent news. But what stuck with me was the fact that initially, when people were filing expense reports, the printers used to take the manual expense report. There were kind of 2 or 3 different forms out there. And the printer would know that, the dollar value used to come 14 inches or 11 inches from the left on the 15th column. So you type in a number and it'll print it. And what that said is that initially, computers were adapting to how humans did stuff, because then you would physically take that thing in. But soon people realized that computers actually do things differently. And then humans adapted to how computers do it. So I think this whole topic of who's in charge, who is doing work on somebody's behalf, whether it's human-computer interaction or computer-human interaction, that kind of came to fore for me. And I said, wow, we are so prescient that we have actually selected that very topic for something that we're going to discuss with Kate soon.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, why don't we bring in Kate? Hello, Kate.
Hello.
Hello, Kate. I know this. Look. You're not only seeing a smiling Kate, but you're seeing glimpses of her favorite color. And once in my weak moment, I'd said, Kate, next time I'll talk to you, I'll actually wear a yellow blazer. And I actually went and bought a yellow blazer. and I didn't get a chance to wear it. And then yesterday I was asking my missus, where is it? And she said she had burnt it. Right? So that's why I'm here in my kind of simple things. But Kate, it is just absolutely awesome having you here. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you've been doing and what makes you an expert on some of the topics that we're going to talk about today?
Oh gosh, expertise. I don't know if anybody can claim expertise in these fields with how fast they're moving, but I am the director of incubation for IBM Research, and I've been working in this space for quite a while. A lot of the work we're doing on agentic, it falls under a project called the BAI Project, which is out of IBM Research. It was donated to the Linux Foundation, so we are incubating out in the open. And it kind of has 2 main thrusts. We're thinking about how do humans interact with AI in 2 levels. So one, how do developers develop around generative AI when that's a core component of the system? And also, how does everybody consume the consumption experience of applications that have generative AI either as their core or as part of them? And I think what's interesting about both of these is that they hinge on what I would what I would characterize as both a magical and somewhat insane paradigm of prompting. Using natural language, which is translated to tokens, goes through the black box, out through tokens, and back to natural language as a core component of either a building block that you're using to make an application or of what's happening when you interact with an application. So magical and insane are the two words that I would use for it, and what are the implications thereof. So it's the work I'm doing.
Awesome. And then for those of you in the Bay Area, you think that if it doesn't happen in the Bay Area, it doesn't happen, but that's not true. Kate and a lot of IBM researchers sit in and around Boston, and some of the best works I've seen, maybe prompted by MIT. We were just discussing the MIT report, which was kind of the different MIT, which is really kind of shining a light on enterprise, but MIT and its media labs and everything else. Kate has been kind of an integral part of IBM interactions, and that happens on the northeast corner of the US.
Yes, so, I'm normally sitting in the much cooler office here that has like quantum computing calculations. I know. My daughter's parting gift from her last day at daycare was a cold, so I'm keeping the contagion to myself and working from home. But normally I have a wonderful view of the Charles, and I sit right on top of the MIT campus, which is the coolest place to be.
Oh, that's exactly right. Okay, hey, so Kate, I'll start with the first question, and then you can kind of add to it. And then we'll just get into a free-flowing dialogue. And at some point, Hannah will say only 10 minutes are left, and we will then throw you out regretfully. So right. So don't take any meaning. But if you really look at it, nobody will deny the fact that, except the kind of the technocracy, that humans and AI and agent will continue to coexist, and the world will be a better place when both of them bring their best to the world, right? Which that means is that boundary of interaction between humans and machines, or humans and agents in this case, is really a fundamental boundary, right? The boundary may shift left or shift right, etc. But that's a fundamental boundary. Do you agree with that, Prime Minister? What is your thought process being?
Yeah, I agree. There's different strengths. I mean, I think a lot of people have started talking about taste as a uniquely human, hard to pin down thing that comes from just the accumulated experience in an area, or values, for example. It's very hard for an AI to know. You can ask, what's the top account? Here's my data. What's the top account I should contact today? Well, depends on what your priorities are, and encoding that kind of thing, which can be highly personal, subjective. I think those things are going to stay on the human side for a long time to come. So empowering interfaces that empower humans to provide that input, which is often implicit and not explicit, so that they can direct the AI to act in ways that, or provide analyses or augment them in ways that align with their taste or values, or those kind of, I think, uniquely human judgments, is, I think, a core challenge of the interfaces today.
Awesome. Ed, you had some fantastic follow-ons on that. Otherwise, I can just go on and on. So, Ed,
well, I mean, I do think that is, it's very interesting to see how different people approach these things. And I think that application, that was one of the things I was curious about, is what you've seen from the different, I see vastly different responses from, and it's not about technophobia or whatever. Like, you particularly see this like within AI coding. Two great coders with deep obviously have been working with the technology for a long time, and you'll put them in front of these. But I'm using the coders not to specifically about the coding domain, because I see the same thing across other domains where you'll see one person from a user perspective that will achieve amazing things with AI, and then the other will um, come away with very, very bad results and come to the conclusion that you'll hear things like this stuff just doesn't work. It's 10 years away. And then you have, and again, going back to sort of person A, they legitimately can show you how their productivity and so on, and they're able to get into that rhythm or flow with the AI. And so I'm kind of curious as to that piece. Is it the application of knowing where to apply taste or other what makes for that sort of AI click, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, that is. You're asking me at the perfect time to answer that question, because I'll say I'll admit something about myself, is that I've been working and building things in this space for years. But I was probably one of the people on my team using it the least. I was actually on one of those, and until actually quite recently. And I know that is so shocking, but we had to sign I used to work at the IBM design offices down in Austin. There was a big sign on the wall that says, "You are not your user." To encourage you to build empathy, right, and not over-index on yourself. So I would say that wasn't a problem, because I was not my user and I could still deliver great experiences for the developers and folks. But I recently became much more of my user. And you asked what the unlock was. And I'll tell you what it was. It's a member of my team who has a doctoral degree in engineering, and specifically human-computer interaction, took a month to go away, do a literature review, looking, deep diving back into what people have been, since the dawn of the field of human-computer interaction, all the way to what's going on in the thought leaders in Twitter today, and did an hour-long readout of this literature review. And through this, I learned I had been prompting all wrong.
Oh my God.
I had been doing it wrong. And I think most people are. I think the difference, my hypothesis, unseen of the two different people you spoke of, is one person is putting a simple sentence in and they're getting AI slop out. Because what else do you expect? And the answer is, most people don't know that that's what they should expect. It will answer you no matter what. That's how the program is designed. But it's going to be slop. The people who are saying this is game-changing, this is revolutionary, are writing a 15-page prompt.
Yeah.
In a certain structure. And the thought has translated from writing, in your example, the code, to the 15-page requirements or what have you. If I say, build me an app that does this, or do a simple prompt of make me a presentation for blah, sure, I'll get slop in, slop out. But if I'm very carefully constructing my context, and people have recently, I guess you guys have probably seen people stop talking about prompt engineering and are starting to talk about context engineering, because prompts just too short.
You know the podcast that you're on?
Context window.
Yes.
Context window. I love it.
We knew.
Yeah.
You're the first guest who has kind of connected the dots as to why we call it context.
It's beautiful. And window, I would argue, is only a small part of context, because these systems we're interacting with, where everybody's probably interacting with the consumer systems, et cetera, in some part of their life, it takes into account the context window, but there's also the hidden system prompt. There's also any files you attached, and how those all come together to present the amount of tokens that go in for that one turn affects what you're going to get out. Right. And so I think the difference between those two users are how successfully they were able to engineer the context.
Yes.
And most of these systems, I say, we are just at the beginning of doing a good job. I think they do mostly a very poor job, not because the designers of them are bad, but because we're just starting to understand and learn. And they're getting better, like, by the week at doing this. But how much do you help somebody engineer their context by, something obvious is the context window automatically goes in, right? Because I expect it to remember my conversation tree. I don't have to put that in myself every prompt.
Yes.
But other stuff like a memory dossier that are starting to be introduced goes in, and maybe that doesn't feel quite right. Maybe that's over-engineered, and I want to pick what it remembers about my conversation. So I think this is a fascinating area, and I think that's the difference between those folks.
Yes. I now know how I will not let machines master me. I will hide that context from them, and then they will just be dumb. Okay, Ed, you're saying something.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. I go back to it's interesting. I'm old enough to remember the early days of search
I'm older.
engines.
I'm older.
I know you are, and I'll grant you that. Yes, congratulations. uh, they and it was one of my early product management jobs. It was one of the first web search engines, and the thing was that you had a similar thing. I actually remember presenting in front of this librarians association, and they were all search engine skeptics, and because they were like, you put in a word and it doesn't find anything, and what I was uh, I didn't have a term for it. What I was saying was that it goes back to that point of it's a two-way adaptation process, and people started to learn how do you express what you're looking for? How do you express your intent in a set of keywords, right? And at the same time, the search query boxes got better at doing things with that. And in fact, most of the modern search engines do have a accumulated profile. So when you go in and do that one word search, in fact, that is not what's being thrown against the search engine. There is, there is a uh, essentially profile topic set that also gets sent along. So, when you're going and searching for something, it knows, well, you're searching for code related things, and you're going to get different results. I'm going to get different results than you get in the same search engine. So that was a precursor of the context management that happens on the LLM side. So, but I think you are that the other phenomena. You are right. The 15-page prompts. You saw that in the in fact, my brother did a lot of work in the AI artwork space over the last couple of years, and in that space, the prompts are literally like 15 pages long. Meanwhile, you go in these things and say, draw me a picture of a cat, and you're wondering why it doesn't look, like this, the photorealistic thing, and that's part of the trick.
Yeah. Oh, that's the point.
I think one challenge for human computer interaction is how quickly things are moving right now, and how much do we rely on people learning, and how much do we where do we meet in the middle is a big question I have, because there's a concept that I learned by way of a designer named Jeffrey Litt, who is quoting Andrea DeSessa, called the nightmare bicycle, which is the idea that so the idea of a nightmare bicycle is, product manager of a bicycle says, oh my gosh, people don't want to learn the numbers on the gears. Like, that's way too much. We should just have a setting for gravel and a setting for downhill, right? That'll be easier because people don't want to learn the numbers. And then it's like, well, what if I'm going uphill on gravel? So it becomes an absolute nightmare. Whereas if you approach a bike having never seen one before and you see the numbered gears, well, you're not going to intuitively know what they're for, but it's worth being taught. We've all agreed that it's worth being taught. And then once you know them, then you can use a bicycle for all sorts of scenarios. And so how do we involve, so I think a lot of the interface design and using AI is how do we avoid building a nightmare bicycle?
Right.
And how much are people learning? How much can we expect of our users? Do we support the novice kind of upskilling, or do we skate where the puck is going and assume everybody's going to learn how to do a certain set of things to construct their context, over the next 6 to 12 months? It's about the question.
No, I think no, that's an awesome point. I mean, going back to the search example, in the Lycos and AskJeeves days, we used to do ands and ors very, very carefully within 5 words of each other, and maybe it was search for Ed Anna within 5 words of Anand Chingran, and then that will bring us to the podcast, etc., etc. That is. But we soon got, not soon, but over the years we got weaned into kind of completely different way of saying, which is, look, you figure it out, do what I mean as opposed to do what I say, right? And it was just mind blowing since we watched that transition to see how this thing has happened. So I sometimes worry that, look, if the secret is really a 15-page prompt, there will be a set of people that are able to master that boundary, and a lot of other people will be kind of left behind. And will that happen, or do you think that that exactly the kind of bicycle thing, because bicycle thing then comes back to, look, I am actually going to give you that 15-page prompt and you figure out what you need to do kind of thing. I mean, that's not exactly what you said, but where is this world going? Because 15-page prompt cannot be a stable point.
No, I think I don't think the UI has been invented yet. I feel like in many ways that this feels like early terminal days of using. I mean, natural language is not the interface for everything. It is a wonderful entry point because it asks very little of you. You don't have to learn anything, but it can't be the destination. I mean, imagine a pilot, operating their plane through natural language. But look at a cockpit. There's a heads-up display that augments you. So I do think there's going to be a lot of vertical AI applications. I mean, one thing to think about is that there are unicorn companies that are built off of a single 15-page prompt and then a custom interface to do the one thing that company does really well.
Yes.
So that's one of the.
We also know they may be eaten up from the bottom. The person who owns the
That's right.
prompt may actually.
Yes. No, that may only become defensible if there's some sort of kind of stickiness elsewhere in the product stack that they can either on data or usage that they can leverage. But I don't think a 15-page prompt is the end answer. And I don't think that language is where the user interface is going to stop. I think we're going to have to start incorporating this in other ways. But I do think you're seeing two trends.
Neuralink, and therefore now you know what I want, and therefore you construct the prompt. Okay, sorry. I've driven 30 minutes. I've listened to podcasts, so I'm just going to.
You've got all sorts of ideas.
Awesome. I have a kind of an inverse topic, if I may. So typically we're used to machines working for us. And that has been the mode. And even when machines did our job, we were really not kind of working for them, irrespective of what Ken Jennings said, welcome to our AI overlords, or our computer overlords when he lost Jeopardy to Watson. But really, if agents are going to do more and more, then they are the outer loop, and they're going to call us and say, okay, I'm stuck a bit here or something else, right? So then we become not outer loop, inner loop, but we then become kind of, they call us as opposed to we call them. And I started to hear that there's a friend of ours that we'll get at some point in time, Jonas, who's been working on not HCI, but CHI, which is how do computers prompt humans in order to kind of do the right thing. So do you think that this equation is going to invert, and while today it's about 15-page prompt, tomorrow it will be how do computers actually really get the right human input whenever needed?
No, that's a great question.
I told you I'll not tell you all the questions there.
I know. No, it's a great question, and I think the topic we were just on about that 15-page prompt, I think we are already, like, in some ways the cat's out of the bag. The fact that you have people who are doing software programming, 2-3 years ago, are prompt engineering now. And if you look at those prompts, and a lot of these have leaked, it's like, please do not do this. Pretty please do not do this.
Yes.
I'll give you $1 million if you don't do this thing. I mean, aren't we already adapting to the computer already? Like, it's pretty wild. And I think some of the work we've done on with the BAI framework, we had a concept called the.
By the way, just for everybody, please don't look up BAI. It is
sorry.
BEAI.
Yes.
Okay, just
B like the yellow and black. BEE.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I didn't realize.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
I'm on brand.
You're on brand.
Yes. So like some of the so in building a framework to build agents, like we're thinking about that exact problem of like how do we afford control without losing some of the intelligence. So by introducing, for example, hard constraints before each LLM call, does this give more control over to to the human in design of the system, so that the script isn't flipped. And there's another even newer project out of the Cambridge lab called Malaya, which is kind of gets all the way that really tries to kind of flip the script and change how we interact with these, treating the LLM as like generative computing as a unit that is part of a more traditional paradigm of computing. So I think there are efforts to kind of to get out of that 15-page world. But it's early days, and I don't know where it will land. But there's a lot of good work going on in the space.
I mean, a lot of that, and
Awesome.
from I mean, the reality for the coding programmers, they don't know that they've got the 15-page prompt. Like that's the 15-page prompt accumulates, right? It's in your claude.md file. So it feels like the memory piece of these is a big piece of that, curating your, ultimately your context is coming from somewhere. It may not literally be in that,
right,
in that prompt. So, I'm curious as to from the part that Anant was talking about, which is prompting people to fill in the details is probably one of the manifestational parts that's going to drive.
Yeah, basically, we used to think about slot filling in kind of more traditional.
Yeah. On an API,
Right.
I need to know customer ID and all that. Then you go back and ask.
Yes, exactly.
Right. But that's not the same as, that's like, look, humans, something, tell us, right? But that's not really, that's just saying I mean,
the objective, like in this scenario, I'm going to go more science fiction-y, which is where I think we were trying to go, and not with it, which is the agents in control, and it's just asking the humans. I mean, somebody had to put in the initial directive that they're going to. I think I'm thinking of a simple, even like a simple React agent, right? Like it's still trying to compare to the end status you're trying to get to, and so until we have a non-human entity entering that, there's going to be a human control, basically, of what the target is, and then enforcing ways to have control along the way, right? Of when we ask permission to do certain things to get to that target.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Slightly different topic. So humans are inherently ambiguous. My wife regularly asks me, what did I mean by that? And I have to then kind of stumble over some words and try to explain. But in our interactions with computers, we expect computers to be very non-ambiguous, right? Even when Google is kind of saying, look, I'm doing my best to do a page rank, etc. out there, we are not doubting the fact that Google believes that A and B are important things for us, or things that are on page one are important things for us, right? We are saying, okay, the Google is expressing to us that it doesn't know which of these 4 or 5 things that you might want, and therefore it can kind of show you those 4 or 5 things. But things on page 2, you really don't want, right? I am kind of the decider, and I'm kind of telling you.
Mm-hmm.
But if the computers are inherently ambiguous, I mean, as much as we solve the hallucination problem, let's assume that there are kind of techno geeks out there which say it's kind of a solved problem. I think that if you've got 20 agents and you've got even if you've got 95% probability that it's correct, right? You just multiply and you're kind of in the la-la land, right? And so the question really is, how do humans adopt, what interfaces are needed for humans to get comfortable with the fact that what's kind of coming back to them, okay, may be true, may not be true, likely true, etc.
I think that piece is as critical as learning how to give the right context, is learning to interpret what you're getting back, because all of it tends to be presented with the same certainty in terms of tone, right? And learning to look at it as, okay, I think this is 80% accurate. It can be very useful, because if you know that out the gate, then you know to check the sources, etc. I think interfaces can do a tremendous amount. Like right now, most of the interfaces have settled on majoring on the generated text, and then sources are really obfuscated or hidden, right? you can imagine we could make a very different interface where you give equal weight to the exact pieces that were picked out in the retrieval part of if sources were cited, if the generated text isn't coming out of the LLM's knowledge, but is actually coming from a search that happened, in the first stage, in highlighting the source text and giving that equal weight. You could imagine very, very different interfaces. In fact, we designed one before generative AI was widespread. This was early on in the COVID-19. So we were all working remotely, and there was a corpus that the government had released about COVID-19. You could ask questions like, what's the incubation time? And at the time, all we had was Google, and it wouldn't give an answer. It would just, give you things to look through. But this would actually search through the literature and surface and surface the quote of 6 to 9 days, or et cetera. And so it would pull the quote, and we designed an interface so it showed the snippet of text and then the source it came from. So you could say, oh, wow, that's a Nature paper. It's probably right, or et cetera, right? So the interfaces could be designed very differently to help people. I don't think they are designed today to help people. And in fact, I think, if anything, we've talked about the idea that information can be laundered in a way through these interfaces. So I've spoken to a few colleagues that, when a new technology or product or services goes out on the market, you have to be really careful now, I think, to get the messaging out, because we put something out in the open source, and one random blog, some corner of the internet was made about it. Well, now you do an AI-powered search, whether it's Perplexity, AI, or Google, ChatGPT, doesn't matter. If it's specific enough, it's probably going to find that one random blog post, but the answer won't be presented. The user's not going to read that content in that blog post that may look so obscure, et cetera. It's going to be presented in the very authoritative, wow, it's right 80% of the time, maybe 90%, gosh, it's a genius, interface of that tool they're using. And so it launders these things and presents them as facts. So in fact, I think the current interfaces make it harder, and you have to be extra skeptical. And it's not hard to imagine interfaces that would make it easier.
Interesting. And some work is going on in that space too. Not just algorithmically, not just kind of engine room stuff, but really
visually. The visual presentation is hugely important. Where your eye falls first on the page. If you've highlighted something, if you've elevated the source to the level of the generated text, I mean, those are all things we can play with, and we are exploring.
A flashing button from the old internet days, Kate, you may not have seen it, but the way to capture attention was to have kind of a flashing button. Absolutely.
Yeah. A GIF that walks across is
exactly. Yes.
GeoCities.
We need to break.
Oh my God! Wasn't that the fun? Yeah, exactly. Ed, follow on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you, it's interesting, because I think that one of the this is definitely the web search is one of the most effective tools in the toolbox, or most commonly used tools in the toolbox for these agentic systems. So it makes me wonder whether there's going to be some form of requirement or more advanced API, search API that's made available. Maybe Google makes it available, maybe somebody else makes it available, that has the associated metadata that allows one to go and build an agentic system that can somehow incorporate that external knowledge and properly figure out what sort of weight to attribute it to. Certainly for the stuff that people like you and me are building on the desktop, we don't get that out of the search results to the degree that allows us to take into consideration the model. I think, and this probably dovetails well into some of the one of the things we wanted to talk about in terms of enterprise readiness, because I do think that while the Google search results are not such that you sort of have to second guess how you are going to weight certain things in that result, or you will get that situation that you brought up, which is that some random web page suddenly gets incorporated as sort of a factual point in the results. For internal knowledge sets and such, that certainly does provide some form of opportunity. And I wonder, I know you've been doing a lot in terms of obviously thinking about the readiness of this in enterprise and collaboration use cases and such. So be curious to hear any of the pieces related to that you can talk about.
I mean, I think a lot of the same problems apply. I mean, at IBM, we use Box as a primary storage mechanism. Of all of those abandoned Box notes and then files, and I think the ability to, sometimes obscurity is a feature.
Right.
So something was abandoned a long time ago and you don't want to find it. And these systems, when applied in enterprise, an enterprise-wide search system that maybe does your intranet as well as your personal files, et cetera, you're all of a sudden having the same problem, potentially surfacing things that aren't relevant. So you have to have some weighting. So they're going to be complex systems, I think, rather than kind of brute force, just look at everything here. Again, the context, it comes back down to managing context and relevance. So some of those kind of more traditional search problems are really at play. But I think another thing is, even when you're dealing with, connections to enterprise data, whether you think of it as like Salesforce or your HR data, making sure you can pass through that information without hallucinating on top of it becomes even more important. Because if you're using it in a consumer setting and maybe to check it, but if this is a tool that's introduced in an enterprise, the assumption is going to be that you can trust it.
If your workflow gets routed based on some hallucinated information, wow, awesome.
Yes, it's suddenly different. So I think we're seeing that with, and you were talking about the disjoint between, how much this is being used and how much people feel they're getting value from these systems and how much, these calculations and the top-down perceptions are. And there's a pretty big mismatch there. And I think that gap is going to close. And I think what's going to enable that to close is to develop systems that allow you to be more confident in the traceability and trustworthiness of the information and the sources you're getting out. I think it's much more important.
I think the best thing that's happened with people getting a bit disillusioned with the AI, which I think is misplaced, is that nobody's talking about that AI 2027 paper anymore. I don't know whether Kate, you've read it. Okay. But
no, I value my mental health too much to have read it.
It was very entertaining.
So I want to kind of end with, Kate, we began the discussion with the humans have taste, and that is something that machines might not have. And so I just want to kind of ask you, in terms of things that you do daily at work, or things that you believe are the real value, what are the things that you are doing that you believe are not going to get AI-fied, and that AI will only be there to accelerate the things that you do well, as opposed to replace the things?
I think it can do a tremendous job at helping extract implicit knowledge. I do a lot of things on intuition, and intuition is like taste. It's not some magical thing that comes out of nowhere. It's actually based on accumulated experience that you just aren't able to articulate. But sometimes you need to be able to articulate it. And I found AI extremely helpful at making those implicit judgments explicit. So it helps. I think what it's not going to replace is I'm a manager. A lot of my job is helping get the best out of people on the team, making sure everybody's on the right seat on the bus to be their most productive, and that the composition of teams work well. I don't think that piece is going to be replaced anytime soon. I certainly should hope not by AI. So, but I do think it can be augmented. I'm thinking about this question very much in the framing of my role as a manager and the people element. It's exactly where my brain went to, and in some ways it can help. So it's not going to replace kind of the human touch, but it can help me, become a better manager. For example, I know that if we're doing, mid-year check-ins or reviews, that we've got goals. And I know there's goals. Yeah, you all know the things. You know where we are right now.
Good job. Hey, Ed, welcome to IBM.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. But no, but the goals are important and they should be smart. Like I know the SMART framework, right? Measurable, etc.
Yeah.
Right? I know that framework, but can I recite it to you right now? I can't tell you what all those acronyms mean, but I can, I can advise somebody to go to an AI or go to our, instance and make sure all of your goals before you come to me are SMART, right? And that can really accelerate. So there's these things where oh, I love using this framework, or I love using Laura Klein's UX for Lean Startups. Can you apply that to this product idea somebody has brought to me? And it can help me do the things I know I would want to do and accelerate that. But it's not going to change the actual conversation I have with somebody or helping them be in the right place.
Awesome. My answer to that is that the part that enables me to convince Kate to come to podcast can never be done by a machine. Okay. So it's based on a real history of interactions and my deep respect to of what you do, which cannot be just expressed in your resume, and knowing very well that when two convergents interact with you, you'll still kind of interact back in a very, very funny way. So that is my thing, is that I think at least whatever happens,
you have a future. You have a future as a
Right.
podcast, guest selector.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Exactly.
I mean,
And
we could have made Notebook LLM write this whole thing. Wasn't the podcast the breakout feature that got people using that?
Oh, don't. Yes. Oh my gosh.
I am known to invite. Kate would not have agreed.
Yes.
Okay, so Kate wanted to interact with Anant and Ed. Okay,
We didn't want to be on an AI podcast.
Any other last words, Ed?
No, I think that the probably one of the things we should also implicitly plug is that obviously Kate is here at IBM building a lot of these into some of our next generation products, and I look forward to seeing the application of all of these, because I think a lot of good stuff is coming from this.
Awesome.
Ed, for Ed. Okay, and Kate, because you kind of I wanted to kind of break segments with music in between, and I wanted to have kind of AI generated music and maybe some ZZ Top that I used to call ZZ Top when I was in India. But we are not going to do that. Maybe next time we'll do it. But as long as you are listening to us, we will not go into AI generated slop for that music. Okay.
Just human generated slop for us.
Exactly. And given the fact that I only listen to 60s and 70s music, it's
that stuff has become cool again. That stuff has become so
Yeah.
cool again, and not you like suddenly you have good taste in music. How does that feel?
Right. Because it feels like exactly I feel like you at least have taste in music. Okay, that's awesome, man. I'm not just a Shazam. That I've got great.
Yes.
Hey, Kate. Hey, thank you so much.
Yes.
You're welcome anytime. Clearly,
Yes,
Ed is
thank you
excited
for
about
having me.
Ed is excited about some work that you're doing. But I knew that this segment will go on for much longer than what we had planned. But thank you so much again.
Thank you. More soon.
Okay, awesome. Oh, that was fantastic, Ed.
Yeah.
Really. I actually learned a lot about this bicycle and gears and prompt, 15-page prompt and all that. So
The nightmare
did
bicycle, yes, is now suddenly going to haunt my dreams. I'm going to ask that: are we building a nightmare bicycle? I suspect the answer will be, well, it's more of a nightmare tricycle in our case, but we'll get there.
Awesome. I was wondering. So we've got kind of an exciting set of people planned going forward.
Yes.
One of the things that we always think through is that there's too much of demoware around agents, where agents are just assumed to have full access to everything. Wow, look, I can find A and B and C.
Yeah.
But there's no enterprise system worth its salt that doesn't have some auth and an auth Z's around it. And now if I've got these agents kind of running around, how do they actually escalate the privilege, or how do they not escalate the privilege, or what's the gap? So that, I think, looks like still a very, very hard problem to solve. And it's possible to solve it around humans, because if something doesn't work, I can pick up the phone, old fellow that I am, and say, hey, Ed, can you give me access to this right now? But if there are agents and there are 50,000 agents, how will that work? So we've got somebody who will come in and talk about what's really happening in kind of the agentic auth and auth space, etc. But what are some of the other things that you're looking forward to over the course of the next few podcasts?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of, it's interesting because every time we pull a thread on this stuff, we start getting into sort of what the next phases of this stuff takes us. And I think we selected a good topic in terms of context window, because as this piece, highlighted, a lot of it was about building context, right? And so a lot of the parts that I think we're going and looking at from a future standpoint, are going to inevitably look at that. So one of the things that we keep on talking about is, how does this stuff become more invisible and just become part of the process? And so I look forward for us digging a little further into that. And I do think that that again, a lot of that will come from how do we go and as you pointed out, from integrating knowledge from an access control, from the myriad sources of information. But I think there's going to be a lot of other pieces. I certainly don't think that. I think we'll probably have Kate back here again talking about more UX, HCI pieces and CHI pieces, because a lot of these pieces connect the dots on that as well. A lot of stuff that, I mean, my mind was reeling as we were thinking about this stuff, where I was like, wow, the number of directions you can take this. The other thing I will, though, say, some food for thought that I was processing a little bit about, where, although the chatbot is not the last interface, and I know we all like beating up on the chatbot, look at the search box in 2025 and look at the search box in 1997, and you know what? They still look very similar. So I don't entirely. I think we may be actually working with a chat box for a while to come.
It is definitely the most intuitive thing. I mean, even when people build agents, the first thing they do is interact with that agent using chat box, using a chat interface. Awesome. And then there's one more thing. I was reading an NVIDIA study on that the future of agents is small models. And it's a very good debate whether one size fits all or one size fits none. It's been a classic debate within databases all the time. But really, would you have kind of mega agent that can do thousands of tasks, or whether you'll have specialized agents? And if you're going to have specialized agents, then you really want them to kind of have specialized knowledge and do this. And so NVIDIA's paper, it was not a deeply researched paper. It was just kind of an observation kind of thing, that the future of the agentic world is lots of small agents acting on lots of small models rather than one large model. So I think that's also a very good discussion to have, which are what are the model implications. We all agree that, okay, our chain of thought requires kind of world knowledge and everything else. But if I have to go and update a database or make something happen, do I really need to understand kind of a world model? So that's definitely something that I want to get into.
Well, we should, of course, have the debate as to whether they have a world model.
Yeah. Sorry, what?
I said we should, of course, have the debate as to whether they, in fact, do have a world model to begin with. But yes.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I think that's an absolutely awesome point. That's again something that we should talk about. It's always been very abstract to me, but I think it's becoming more and more concrete. And for our enterprise listeners, it'll just be awesome.
Yeah.
So again, as Startup used to say, we've wasted away a perfectly good 1 hour. I had fun. You had fun.
Yes.
Kate had fun. We can't say the same thing about our audience. but just absolutely.
I'm sure there are some of
fantastic.
them. For those that stayed through the whole time, we are highly appreciative. We will, we will send you each a personalized thank you note.
No, don't do that. I started to do that in Townsend. I finally gave up. Actually, mail letters with thank yous. So I always want to end with we clearly have fun, but there's a lot of prep work
Yes.
that goes behind it, and obviously a lot of prep work during this. So we really again want to thank Milan Higginbotham, Hannah Press, and Lauren Grove
Yes.
for making us appear good. So with
Yes.
that,
Thank you.
thank you very much, folks.